Welcome, welcome, welcome. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHES 1220 and 98.1 FM. Well, every single week, over 7.5 years, wow, 7.5 years, we have a show called Ask Brien, AskBrien, and each week we either interview somebody about business so you can learn something about business, or we'll have a founder that created a business and we'll try to learn from that person what they needed to do to accomplish their goals. But the big factor here is nobody understands why Brien is spelled with an E. Everybody thinks that Brien is spelled Brian or Bryan, but not too many people spell it Brien unless they're from Ireland and they're going to the local pub. You might go to the O'Brien pub. But we have a resident expert who was out last week. Now she's back, so can we get a little hooray? All right. Tracy, you're back.
Oh my gosh, what a welcome. I feel so loved. Well, you were saying that there might be some confusion for others around why we spell Brien with an E, but I personally understand it on multiple different levels as to why we spell it with an E. And I'd like to just say, first and foremost, it has everything to do with the engineer. And hello,
thank
Andrew.
you.
I understand that I am basically going to be the only girl power in the studio today. Jen is on vacation, which she is allowed to do, but that leaves me as the solo estrogen component in the show, which I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I do know that we have an extraordinary guest who I consider to be a friend, a mentor, and so much more. So I think I'll make it through today, Peter.
Well, that was before the show. After the show, we'll no longer be friends, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody that comes on our show ends up being a friend. But sometimes we get really lucky, and we get to have friends actually come on as well. So, and that is extra special when that happens. But speaking of extra special and experts, that's one of the E's that we just can't overlook. Is that on the Ask Brien radio show, we are always looking to provide our entrepreneurs with really good insights and tips and practices and really ultimately shortcut the learning curve of what it takes to really start and run a business. And the mathematical formula, as we know, but I always like to refresh memories, is that to be considered an expert in your industry, niche, or business category, you must invest a minimum of 10,000 hours in said respective field, but we all know that it's so much more than that. If you had to break it down, though, that would be approximately 40 hours a week. Not going to happen if you're a startup. And over the course of 5 years. However, we, again, based on our own experience, know that a 40-hour work week as a startup is pretty much an anomaly, or you might not be getting it right, or maybe you are getting it right and we got it wrong. But anyway, the whole point is that our experts have so much experience to share with us, and that is absolutely true for today. And there is this whole question around how we get really enthusiastic about our guests, our experts, our episodes, and so much more. Right, Peter?
That's why I'm so excited!
Oh, and Andrew, I know you're a little out of practice of running the board
I
for our
tried.
show.
I
but
tried.
hopefully
He's also deaf.
Now I
and that would be not protecting your eardrum. But that's an E we don't mention very often, probably should more often. And we are all about the education. So if you do still have any eardrum left, we are all about the education. I mentioned shortcutting your learning curve as an entrepreneur earlier, and that is really what we're here to do. We're here to help you grow your business. We're here to keep you motivated and really be able to give you really good practical advice and suggestions so that you don't have to learn things the hard-headed, stubborn way like we did. And I'm speaking about Peter, and when I say hard-headed and stubborn, but that doesn't mean that I don't have empathy, because I do.
I actually think that was the anti-empathy result, but go ahead. Narcissism, you actually do well with narcissism, I see.
What I am not even going to go down that rabbit hole. So, but what I am going to say is that I am incredibly excited and enthusiastic, which we already covered, but it just doesn't hurt to repeat it when it comes to who our guest is today. So I think we should get right into it, unless you just want one more E that I can't resist.
Well, we're going to go through that E, but before we go there, I have a new E now, and that is, this show is very encouraging to people because it encourages people to achieve goals.
Nice one. I like it. I like it coming from you to have a warm and fuzzy word. That is a good, I'm seeing progress.
It's probably from being in court today. I feel empowered. All right, another E. So.
Oh, man. Wow. All right.
Well, when you're in court, you have to actually use your noggin. Anyway, Tracy has a long history with this word, and so she used to watch the movie Grease Lightning, and she doesn't know what it means. But Grease Lightning is what, Tracy?
Well, I do know what it means. It means electrifying, and so are we.
Well, now, the big test. Is Ben still here? Ben, you there?
Is Ben still here? Yes, that is the question.
I am happy to be here.
And on top of that, Ben is spelled with an E. Okay, Ben, B-E-N. All right, so.
Well, it used to be Brien, but somebody ripped off my R and my I. I'm just stuck with the N.
Exactly. Appreciate that. So, people don't know who you are, so quickly go over. We don't need, let's get the Reader's Digest of your background before we get into the company that you're working with, because people don't know that. So you have a company, I think it's Physician Family or something along those lines. But before you got there, did you have another career, another business, or did you work for somebody? What were you doing before then?
I was a chemist.
Really?
Yeah. My background, my training is in chemistry. I'm probably one of the few financial advisors in America who has a master's degree in chemistry. That's where I started off. It's a horrible place to begin in the financial services industry, but I didn't get here because I wanted money. I just got here because I was interested in personal finance. It's something I started researching for my family, and I liked it so much that I decided to build a business around it, which sounds really simple. It took years to build it, but I'm 30 years down that road now, and like Tracy said, I've done a lot of things the hard way because I didn't have a mentor, didn't go to business school. Sciences doesn't exactly prop you up for a business. So I just slugged it out and figured it out as I went along. So I've got a lot of war stories to share for sure.
Wow. So two things come to mind with being there. We don't have too many chemists on the show. I got to be honest. You might be the only one. We have had people with a pharmaceutical background or involved with drug companies or whatever, but not too many chemists. So you might be the first one. So congratulations. After 7.5 years, we finally got a chemist on the show. I've been working. We finally figured it out. We have a chemist. Congratulations. Now, I don't know too much about chemistry. I remember the periodical chart. That's about as far as I go. And I know that everybody knows that you need 2 parts of hydrogen and 1 part of oxygen to get water. But besides that, I would think that a chemistry background could be helpful if you, and we're going to get into this later on, is when you're providing financial advice, you may have a different background when it comes to various drugs, pharmaceuticals, chemicals. Hey, that'll never work. You might have that little added edge that nobody else is going to have. So that's how I would treat the whole financial area that you're involved in, that you probably have some expertise that nobody else does. So you mentioned you're working in chemistry, and then what happens? You just all of a sudden you're working on mixing, compounds together, nitric oxide and carbon and all these other things, and then all of a sudden a light bulb goes off and says, "Well, ha! I need to start a business." How did you create Physician Family, and what is it?
I was starving as a graduate student in the master's degree program at the U of O, actually the PhD program at the time. And I was living in this really cheap half-basement apartment. I could look up at the windows and see the cats walking by and the undergirdings of cars. And I just thought, I got to get out of here before there's an earthquake and this whole building falls down on my head. And I thought, oh, gosh, I don't have renter's insurance. And that was like the beginning of my journey as a personal financial guy. I decided I needed renter's insurance, and so I looked it up, and it was interesting. And later on, I sold a car, and I had some extra money, and I thought I wanted to invest it. And so I went in. I was just talking about this to my chemistry prof, the guy who was running the program I worked in, and he said, "Oh, well, you should go down and buy a Schwab 1000." And I was like, I didn't know what that was, but he was developing pharmaceuticals. And I said, no, I want to buy a pharmaceutical company. What should I get? And he said, well, this is when Bill Clinton was in power, and he had just recently kind of shouted down the pharmaceutical companies, and their stock prices were depressed. And I said, no, I want a company. He said, why don't you buy Merck? And I was like, okay. And so I bought, I think it was 1 or 2 or 10 shares of Merck. I mean, it was next to nothing. And over the course of the next year or so, the price of that stock doubled. And I thought, wow, this is magic. And for the first time in my entire life, I started reading the newspaper because I was watching the stock prices go up. This is back when newspapers were in print and people actually read them.
I was just about to ask
that
what
really
that was.
got me interested.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just, not too many people know what newspapers are anymore, so you might have to explain it to the younger audience. Generation Z is like, what's a newspaper?
Yeah, there was a time when we used to kill trees and spread ink on them and then throw them at people's houses so that people could read them. This is long before you could just dig it up on your iPhone, right?
Wow. Before the iPhone, that's another amazing treat. So I didn't mean to interrupt, although quite frankly I did mean to interrupt, but I'm just trying to make it look good. So, did you invest in other stocks, when did you decide that, hey, this is the way to go?
Well, in my spare time, I went to the library, the stacks at the U of O, the Knight Library there. Phil Knight's the founder of our library here. I was just interested in it. So I sat down one day in the library and I read all the magazines they had on the shelf. It was Kiplinger's and Money Magazine. Just took an entire afternoon and dug through the stacks and read them. And by the time it was over with, I thought, this is really cool. And then I went and volunteered for, at that time, Consumer Credit Counseling Services. I said, I'd like to get some more experience with this. And they said, well, we know somebody who does this for a living. They connected me with a person that was sold mutual funds, a regional brokerage. And I went there. I didn't know anything. I had no license. And they were like, oh, well, we'd like to hire you. And I thought, wow, they've seen my interest and my brilliance. And the next thing they did is they made me cough up about $1,000 to buy licenses. And I was like, why do I have to pay you to get a job? I had no idea how the sales thing worked. And so I got my sales licenses, and I was there just long enough to realize that I didn't like selling, wasn't good at selling. I didn't like the conflicts of interest. And that was when fee-only financial planning was kind of in its infancy. And I don't know, one thing led to another, and I just wound up quitting the chemistry program. I got what they call the Booby Prize. I got a master's degree instead of a PhD, and started my own business with 1 or 2 clients.
So before we get into that, the only other thing is, did you ever think about maybe getting an MBA?
It never crossed my mind.
Wow, that's interesting. And
yeah.
Did you ever get a Series 6 or Series 7 or any of those type of licenses?
Yeah, I started out with a 6 and 63. Later on, I got the 7. And then when I became a registered investment advisor, I got to drop all 3 of those licenses because it's complicated. But yeah, I had those sales licenses originally and insurance sales license as well. But no, it never occurred to me to get an MBA. I don't know, I just kind of foundered my way into business, and I guess, I went all the way through advanced calculus and physical chemistry. And, once you can do that kind of math, the stuff that you find in MBA programs It's pretty basic. But no, I have a couple accounting courses under my belt and one econ class.
Well, that's obviously good. So, I think I want to get a little bit into the business that you started. So, you started this business, Physician Family. What made you go to doctors? I mean, you're a chemist. You know, why not go after chemists? Why not go after automobile people? Why physicians?
Well, it's interesting because I did start actually by going after automobile people. I had a mentor at the place that I worked, and he said, here, go down to the library and get a research about real businesses. And so I was like, okay, real businesses, car dealership. And so I was cold calling, and I hooked this guy who ran a BMW dealership. And I thought, wow, if I could get this guy, it'd be great. Well, I came in, and he was doing okay, but car dealers are not rich. He was okay, and he had some people, and so he let me come in and work with his people. I helped him set up a SEP IRA at that time, so a small business employment plan. And we got to be friends, and he kind of became a mentor. And he said, if you could ever work with doctors, you'd really have your hands full. He says, they have a reputation of not being great with money. And I said, okay. So we went along, and then I guess about a year later, he referred a radiation oncologist to me who had gone through a bad divorce. She came in to get her BMW serviced and washed and oil changed. And she was talking to him and said, hey, I'm my finances are a mess. I'm recently divorced. Who's your guy? And he said, I got this guy, but I got to tell you, there's two things about him. And she said, what's that? He said, one, he's honest, and two, he's a total geek. And she's like, sign me up. And so, yeah, that's where I got started. That was the first physician, and I've been serving her for 25 years. She's still with me.
So, but you decided to start a company. Why not work for somebody?
I tried that. I went and I talked with a couple of people in town. The arrogance that I saw among the stockbrokers was really off-putting, and they were doing something that didn't appeal to me. They were cold calling, and I didn't want to cold call. I saw myself as a guy who wanted to function as a consultant, not a salesperson, and they were clearly in the sales business, and it was just off-putting to me. I didn't that business model, even at the very onset of my career, was off-putting. I've always wanted to be on the same side of the table as the client.
So we have about 40 seconds left before we're going to take our first break. You have this company called Family Physicians. How did you?
It's Physician Family Financial Advisors. Yeah.
Physician Family Advisors. Sorry about that. So just tell people what exactly they do.
Yeah, we help doctors make better financial decisions with their personal finances so they have better outcomes for their families.
Wow, I love that because I'm an attorney, and that was very concise. And a whole bunch of characters here. We got this engineer, Tracy, Peter. All right, Tracy, you there?
Yes, I am here, and I am really excited for us to be back from the break so that then we can continue this amazing conversation. So one client, you nailed it, but then now you have over 200 clients. Is that right?
Yeah, we serve over 200 practicing physicians from coast to coast.
And that is an extraordinary growth trajectory. I think our audience would love to know the backstory on how you built that.
It all started with that one physician that I'm still serving. She remarried, and she married a surgeon. And I got to figuring out, how they worked. First, when she hired me, she said, why should I hire you? And I said, I didn't have a good answer. So I said, I think you should hire me because I've never worked with doctors before. And she kind of tilted her head and looked at me, and she's like, what kind of answer is that? And I said, well, I think you get a bad rap. I think people perceive doctors to be bad with money. And I said, with me, I'm a clean slate. I don't know anything about your finances. I know about finances, but I don't know anything about the specialization stuff. And so I said, if you'll just kind of let me hang out and learn from you, learn about you, then, I'll make this work for you. And I held up my end of the bargain. She held up her end of the bargain. She married a surgeon. He was an interesting cat, and I had to kind of rebuild my business to serve both of them in a way that made sense, being able to meet in their hours, that kind of stuff. Long story short, they were happy, and they both worked in practices where they referred colleagues. Some of those colleagues were married to people in other practices, and one day I sat down and traced back, where some of my current clients come from, and they went back through 8, 9, 10 generations of word of mouth, all the way back to the first car dealer. They referred the first physician. So grew by word of mouth. And then at one point, I decided to rebrand the firm. Before it was Utley and Associates, and the associate was my golden retriever. So yeah, so it got larger, and renamed it with some search terms: physician, financial advisor. Put family in there because family is important to doctors, and that went a tiny bit viral. Got picked up in an article in the New York Times, and it's called First Do No Harm. It was about working with physicians. Got mentioned in a book, and it just kind of took off from there. And so over time, I just kept accumulating physicians until I rebranded, and here we are today. So I kept my business small while my kids were growing up, and then when they got to be in about middle school, I decided, okay, it's time to grow up. I'm done being an early father, and I always put my family first. And then, so I hired my first employees, still with me here now on 9 years, and we have three others to boot. So that's kind of the story.
Well, and I love what you mentioned family multiple times. You mentioned how family is important to your target audience. You mentioned, of course, how important family is to you and was to you as you've made choices on the pace to scale your business, and then you integrated it into the name of your practice and throughout your marketing initiatives. What do you think that, or how do you think positioning things with family in them, has that been advantageous to you in terms of attracting your target clientele?
Yeah, it has. In fact, just right before this call, I got off the phone with a prospective client who's in Idaho who has 6 children. So, a high-earning specialist in that area, and we tend to attract clients with more kids than others. In fact, we work exclusively with physicians who have children. So, folks that don't have kids yet have to wait to work with us until they have kids. It's just it's part of the value that we have, just part of our internal values, that we work better with kids. People who have kids, we see eye to eye with parents. And I think that, the general lesson here for all business is that if you're a small business, you got to love what you do, because you're going to have some bad days in there, right? And it's easy to love what you do if it's something that you already love before you even start your business, And I think with every small business owner, or even medium-sized business owners, the business is a reflection of who you are in the beginning. It carries your values, it carries your brand, it carries your sweat equity. You're talking about 10,000 hours to become an expert. I probably have 90,000 hours because I worked for 30 years, 60 hours a week. I think a lot of small business owners do that. And so, you'll find that as you go along, if you're operating in alignment with your values, that everything in life is easier. You know what to say no to, you know what to say yes to. And so, family is just one of our core values here.
And I love what you're saying, too, because I think you hear a lot in business consulting and in books that are written and things around businesses about how it's important to niche down. But I think when it comes to being competitive, that can be a blessing and a curse, because it could be almost a fearful pathway to start out with, saying we're going to do financial planning, we're only going to work with physicians, and we're only going to work with physicians that have families. And so I'm just curious, was there ever any trepidation around being that niche, or were you just always all in on that?
Yeah, it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made in my business career to niche down. And I was very early to niche down. I niched down back when niches were just barely even becoming a thing. But, as much trepidation as I had, and as terrifying as that was, some of the clients I had that weren't physicians just took it with a big yawn. It's like no big deal to them, because they're still working with me. It's the same guy. And, some of them fell off over time. And then, because of the branding and the way that we approach things, we attracted more people that were in our target market. And, other financial advisors have had similar experiences. I think every business has to have an avatar or an ideal client, or kind of a perfect customer to target, because you can't serve everyone. And if you attempt that, your competition who's out there, who's niching down and has a tight focus, they're just going to take that bait from you. And they're going to walk in and steal your customers because they're such a better fit.
And I think one of the things that entrepreneurs have struggled with, and I know I have struggled with it as building my business over time, is actually turning away business that is not a fit for you. Do you have any tips on how to handle that conversation?
Whew. Yeah. I got to say, sometimes it doesn't go well, but it's all in how you position it. One of the things I said is, we're at this moment, we're not prepared to serve, blank, teachers, engineers, whatever happens to be, radio hosts. We're not prepared to do that right now. Or we're best, the people who are happiest here, talking about customers or clients, the people who are happiest here look like this, or they have these characteristics, A, B, and C, where you can be really specific. And a person who doesn't match that criteria will go, oh, I see. I'm not that. I might not be happy there. And then I think to always be of service to the people you come in contact with, whether or not they're going to be a buyer for your service or your business, I think you always want to be of service and be ready to refer them to someone else that is going to be a good fit for them, where they're going to get served, rather than just shutting the door in their face and saying no. I think it's important to be ready to take care of everyone who comes into your kind of in your door, regardless of, if you only sell batteries and they come in for a pipe fitting, by God, send them to the hardware store down the street and have the name on the tip of your tongue of the person who works there.
So, Ben, you made such an excellent point about really honing in and making the right qualified decisions for your business and for the clients that you serve. Let's pivot, because I'm pretty much known to do that, in talking about making those same qualified decisions as you scale your team for growth. Because you had mentioned earlier in terms of retention that your first employee is still right alongside you 9 years later. That's such a testimony to your leadership and your team building skills. And I'd love for you to share with your audience some of your hacks, if you will, of building a team that keeps intact for that duration of time.
Yeah, earlier I mentioned values. I think knowing what values drive your business, the places where you're not willing to compromise, is the first start in getting good people. And then using those values in the hiring process. So, for example, one of our core values is curiosity. So when I get someone who's on the phone that's applying for the job, and I say, have you checked out our website? And they say, yeah. And I'll say, what'd you like about it? And I'll say, it's on the internet. I can tell they haven't visited it. But if they notice that, Jack, my dog, is on there, they'll say something because there's a picture of my dog, Jack. He's our mascot. If they mention Jack, then I'll know that they actually went to our website if they go more in depth. And so that tells me that they're curious enough to check out the website a little bit more. Another value we screen for is humility. So in a service business, you have to have people who think less of themselves and more of others. And so we look for volunteering. So that's a sign of humility. We ask questions about, what mistakes have you made in previous jobs and how did you handle that, right? So you can look for you can create questions that reflect the values that you have. And once you have someone who ticks the boxes on all those questions, then you usually have a pretty good fit for your team. And I'd say the hard part is kind of sussing out what your values are in the beginning.
Well, I think that it's so important, like you said, to bring values into the business, into the recruiting process, just all throughout every layer of business operations. What happens if you bring in a team member, let's say, for example, and you identify right away that they may not be the fit you were hoping for? Or how would you handle that scenario?
Well, there's always probation. You bring somebody in for 30, 60, 90 days. I think your hiring process needs to be clear enough that they know, how long they're going to be here before they're more or less considered permanent. Set those expectations up front, and then evaluate them during that period for fit. And if you find that they're not a fit, of course, you can correct them. You can sit them down and say, hey, listen, this is what you did. This is what we had hoped that you would do. Here's the gap between those two. And, just like you would raising a kid, correct them. Give them a couple cracks at that. If it doesn't work out, then you cut them loose. You can't run a business with people who do not match your culture. Your culture is the sum of the people that you have. And what they say? They say culture eats strategy. And so you have to build your culture first before you build your business strategy. And if you have a person who's not a fit for that culture, the best thing for everybody involved, their coworkers, your bottom line, your customers, and your business is to cut them loose.
And you've delivered so many really great gems, culture, the strategy, talking about how I'm just still hearing in my head about if you do what you love, then you're going to love what you do. I think that's so incredibly important. I would love to know, you're doing a beautiful job of making it sound easy, and we know it's not easy, but you're just so eloquent in how you're speaking about it. So I need to ask you, what are some of the biggest challenges, or maybe the one challenge, because we have about 60 seconds before the break, but what's one big challenge you faced in growing your business?
Getting more customers. Yeah, that's the big challenge. That's the hard part of being a financial advisor. In the beginning, it's hard to be an advisor because you know what you're doing. 5-10 years in, you figure out what you're doing, and it's good. And then you have to look for more customers, and that's the hard part of the business. That's where my challenge is.
Yeah, so for those of you who might just be joining us, right before the break, we talked about Ben's biggest challenge being getting new clients. And I just happen to know, because Ben and I are connected outside of the radio show, I am the very proud producer of your podcast, Ben, Physicians Family Financial Advisors podcast. So I would imagine that's a pretty good way for marketing, for you to get the word out around your business, right?
Yeah, it's been great. People who listen to the podcast come in saying, I listen to your podcast, and so that's how we know that they're getting it. They ask questions around things that we talk about. It's a neat venue. I mean, how else do you get, 1,000 people to listen to you four times a month, twice a month for a half an hour? I mean, that level of attention span is just so rare in this day and age. Podcasting is so easy to do. It's so easy to listen to your audience and talk about the things that they want to talk about. I just encourage anybody that is interested in reaching relationships. If your business is based on relationships, then I think a podcast is a way to go, because it's a conversation, slightly one-sided, but you get to talk to your people and be right there in their pocket, and encourage them, inform them, entertain them, all those good E words you get to put in their ears.
Yes, edutainment, we love to call it. And just to pull that line all the way through from how we started the conversation, missions and values and core beliefs are such a strong foundational piece of you personally and how you've grown your practice. And you have the ability to really genuinely and authentically communicate that through your podcast. And I think you do a fantastic job of that. And it's very powerful. And if people wanted to continue this conversation with you, of course, they could go and download your podcast, Physician Family Financial Advisors. But how could they actually get in touch with you directly to continue the conversation?
Yeah, they could reach out to contact@physicianfamily.com. They could visit physicianfamily.com, which is our homepage. Talks all about what we do. We're unusual in that we post our prices right up front. Our clients actually pay us a monthly membership fee, and you can see the dollar price right there. I think we're one of the very few advisors in the country that actually post their rates, so you can see for yourself. See everything that we do, meet all the team members, all of our bios are there. So it's a great place to reach out and get started. We are open for business. So if you know a physician who wants to be treated well, or if you yourself are one, then we're here. We're open for business, taking clients. So just reach out to us. We're going to go a lot like this call, because I'm the one who takes those sales calls.
And that's just another extraordinary example of how you really walk the walk and talk the talk of your mission and values through every area of your business. And having that clear transparency around pricing, I think, is so important for people to be able to identify and connect and just understand what it is. There's no mystification around it, which I think can happen in the financial space for sure, in any space really. So I love transparency and pricing. I think it's critical to your business success, everyone's business success, in my opinion. But speaking of my opinions, if you haven't heard enough of them today, you can find out and listen to more of the back episodes of the Ask Brien radio show on our podcast. And our podcast, of course, is Ask Brien, Brien, the podcast. And you can go and re-listen to this episode, we're also going to have all of the contact information for Ben and his team in our show notes for the podcast. You will find his podcast, Physicians Family, our podcast, Ask Brien, on wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And we have a few minutes left, Peter, and I know you had a question that was a burning desire that you wanted to ask Ben, so I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Well, thanks, Tracy. And that question I'm not going to ask because otherwise he knows. So we're going to go ahead. And how many advisors do you have at your company?
There are 4 of us.
Okay. So do all 4 of you meet as a team to determine what's the best advice for a physician, or does each one have a group of physicians that they work with specifically?
We all serve the clients collectively. Every client has a point of contact with us. Each one of us has a subspecialization, like one does college, one does home refinance, one does retirement, one does investing, and we're all generalists. So if we find an area that we're a little bit out of our depth on, then we can easily tap one of our colleagues to get some more depth and bring them into a call or into a meeting if necessary. So, yeah, we work as a team, and I mean, it's not uncommon for me to talk with everybody on my team in the course of a day.
And we only have a minute left, so what is your goal for the company?
My goal for the company is to double the size in the next 5 years. So 400 physicians by the year 2029. And
you said on your fee structure, do you, for instance, if somebody is investing and they're buying stocks, whatever, I know you have your Series 63s, whatever, are they paying commissions for those fees, or is that all part of your membership fee?
It's all part of the membership, yeah.
So
it's all included. It's completely transparent.
One and done, and then you don't have to worry about all this extra fees. And because a lot of times I see financial advisors, they'll say, buy the stock, sell the stock, buy the stock, but each time they're making money.
Yeah.
So it's nice to know that there's just one flat thing and you don't have to worry about it, and that they're actually looking at it for your best interest as opposed to their commission. So that's a really good point. Thank you very much.
The final thing I'd say it's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Brien.
Thank you very much, Ben. I'm sorry we don't have a lot of time left.
It was our pleasure.
Thank you again. Listen to KHS 1220 and 98.1 FM, the Ask Brien Show. Over and out.